Hey there, everyone. What's up? I am here today to talk about a game I did an unboxing for just recently, but I did finish it over the weekend, and that game is this one right here, Shinsei Mokushiroku Death March, which is um, it's hard to explain really. It's like a combination RPG and visual novel, but it's more visual novel than RPG, I guess. I didn't know that when I bought it. I guess I probably should have. But it's not really important. It's just there was a lot more reading than I thought there was going to be, so it took me a little longer to beat than I thought it was going to. But yeah, it is a kind of third-person dungeon crawler with lots and lots of kind of visual novel elements. And cherry on top, it's an erotic game, I guess. In some sense, I'll explain that. There are sex scenes that are graphic enough to require a censorship, I guess, Japanese style um, mosaic and everything. So yeah, I'll talk about it. But let's first talk about the graphics. They're simultaneously good and bad. I say that because, well, I mean, look at the box here. These are the character designs. They're all pretty cool, actually. I like the art design for this game. The characters have like these pretty cool designs, and they're all like, got a kind of nice personality to the design, I guess. And the costumes are good. The way they look in the visual novel parts are all good. It looks good. And then the RPG parts are not so good. It's not that they're awful. It's that they're kind of PS2-ish graphics, and not that that's awful. It's just like it's a little bit like this game is made in the Unity engine. I know that because I played a bunch of preview parts of it in the Unity player, and I'm not sure what they're using for models, but they're probably Unity models, which aren't like super well designed or anything. They're all right. It's not terrible. It's just not like something you're going to be like really liking the graphics in. So the visual novel parts, which is the main majority of the game, and is really nice looking though. So when you start playing the RPG parts, it doesn't feel terrible, even though it looks kind of like an upscale PSP game. But that's kind of how it is. That's how these games work. They're not like made on a huge budget. I forgot to mention this is made by it's published by Zeus. Um, and yeah, it says XUSE. And I don't know how you would read that, but I wouldn't read it as Zeus. But the Japanese pronunciation of it is Zeus for some reason, so that's what it is. And yeah, it's published by Zeus and created by, I guess, Digital Devil, and that would be the guy who wrote the scenarios for Shin Megami Tensei. Well, Megami Tensei 2 and Shin Megami Tensei 1 and 2. So he wrote the scenarios for those. And I guess I'll give you a little background on this before I get into a little bit more about what this game is, in case you didn't watch the unboxing. I don't know why you would be watching this though. Um, yeah, this world here, Shinsei Mokushiroku, is not originating in this game. It originates in a pen and paper RPG. This pen and paper RPG, this is Shinsei Mokushiroku Sin Apocalypse, and this game is actually a straight up Shin Megami Tensei game. Shinsei Sin Apocalypse is, and I say that because uh, the guy who wrote this and also wrote this game was writing the Shin Megami Tensei pen and paper RPG, and he wrote those, and this was a new version of that game that they canceled. So he had all the stuff written and the new rule set. So he kind of just took all that stuff from the game, the previous Shin Megami Tensei pen and paper game, and made Sin Apocalypse. And this isn't like my speculation. This is like, if you have the previous version of the Shin Megami Tensei pen and paper game, you can like compare these two books, and there's characters that are the same. There's like whole parts of it that are the same. It's the same game. I mean, the rules are slightly different, but this uh, it's essentially Shin Megami Tensei. And so when this game was announced, I was like, oh well, that's the scenario writer for Shin Megami Tensei in the Shin Megami Tensei world. That's got to be interesting. And that's the reason I bought it. But you know, it is an erotic game, so I figured, well, it'll be like Shin Megami Tensei, but with some craziness and kind of ultra violence and sex parts and stuff like that. And that's kind of what it is. I mean, it does do a lot of things that are interesting. But since it's a visual novel, it really relies on the characters and the story. And it's pretty great, actually. Let me talk about why it's great. I don't want to give away any parts of the story for anybody who's going to be playing this. I don't know how many out there are going to play it, but if you get a chance, I recommend it. Because, first, this game takes a great pleasure in kind of giving you these characters that seem like cookie cutter cutouts of, you know, these kind of visual novel characters. You've got like your plucky younger sister, and you've got your like kind of obsessed friend, like your friend who loves you from childhood, and you have like the neighbor girl who's like older than you, this your sexy older neighbor, and then you have like this kind of like mysterious kind of exchange student type of thing going on, like and you have, you know, your goofy kind of comic relief sidekick best buddy. And this game takes like great pleasure in introducing these characters as these ridiculous stereotypes, and then smashing them, just totally smashing them. It's totally great. It's it's really amazing, actually, because like you start the game and you're playing and you're thinking like, Jesus, are these the characters? Because these are like totally stereotypical characters. And then like you get into the game and you realize like it's not gonna go that way. Um, and it's like such a great moment in the game when you realize that like these character stereotypes are gonna be totally destroyed. And they get destroyed in so many ways that like by the end of the game it's like totally different characters. And even then, it's also great is that it gives you reasons as to why the characters were like they were in the beginning of the game as you're going through the game. So, you know, they have these kind of stereotypical things that they're doing in the game, and it feels stupid, but then like when you play through and you get the story, you have an explanation as to why they're that way in the beginning. And it's really great, actually. I've never played a game like that where the characters are like ridiculous stereotypes, and the stereotypes get smashed. They get totally changed. The characters get totally changed like pretty quickly in the game, but they get more and more changed as it goes along until like crazy stuff happens. But the thing with it is that in that stuff where all the craziness is happening, you get all this backstory where you understand why they're acting that way. And I think I've been saying that, but like, it was so amazing. Like, there were points when I was playing this game where I'm like just reading the story and I'm just sitting here like grinning like a fool because it's like so great. And how the characters like changed and how they became different people altogether was really great. And it gets really dark. Like, it takes these kind of characters and, you know, it's like taking your kind of funny, goofy characters from a visual novel and slapping them into this like hellscape. It's really like, and then just letting them react to being in this horrible situation, and it's really kind of cool. So let me talk about the story beyond the characters, which are great. I think almost all the characters are really interesting and fun. But the story itself is pretty actually similar to a Shin Megami Tensei story, and it's expected because it's in that kind of world. But if you've played Shin Megami Tensei 1, you know, or even like Devil Summoner, the first one on, the Sega Saturn or the PlayStation or the PSP, I guess, also. It starts off in a kind of normal world. Everything is normal. People are like running about their daily life, meeting their friends, doing things. And then, kind of hell rains down all of a sudden. And that's how Shin Megami Tensei opens. And that's how also Devil Summoner opens. In this game, because it's a visual novel, it takes actually. It took me like a couple of hours before it got out of that, where it's just like their normal lives introducing these characters. And, I'm playing the game for a couple hours and I'm thinking like, I thought like it would kind of hop into the RPG parts pretty quickly, and it didn't. It took a couple hours of just doing the visual novel parts to even start doing something that where I was actually controlling a character on the screen instead of just reading. And what that did was it actually like built up the story and the characters in a way that like when it all came down, like it was it was pretty powerful actually, even though the setup is kind of like a goofy horror movie, and that's like almost how Shin Megami Tensei, for example, starts in the same kind of way and throws the same kind of enemies at you. These kind of weak enemies that are like, zombies and things. And that happens, but for example, in those other games, the scale moves really quickly. Like you're suddenly from like normal guy to like countrywide machinations. It's the scale gets really big really quick in Shin Megami Tensei, but in this game, the scale doesn't get really big really quickly. It grows very slowly. So you have this kind of it's like encroaching doom almost. Like you can feel the story, and when you're reading the story, it really feels like you can kind of feel like how it's changing and getting worse and worse. And I think it's done really well in the sense that you're playing it and you think like, oh well, this situation kind of sucks, but we'll see what happens, and then you get there and it gets worse and worse and worse, and like they kind of you start seeing the characters getting locked into these terrible situations that there's no escape from. And it's pretty gripping in the sense that like I was thinking about this game when I was at work. Like I couldn't wait to get home to continue playing because I just wanted to know what was going to happen next, because always like some kind of situation was leading to some worse situation to some worse situation. And the story was really strong in that sense. And it does have like some kind of, I don't know, I want to say it's like a Shin Megami Tensei style kind of chaos law kind of conflict going on. You don't really have a different ending kind of thing. There's no main different ending. There's only one ending, it seems. That's an actual ending besides death. So you can die in this game over and over by selecting wrong things in the kind of story elements. So let me actually talk about that, because it's a part of the erotic parts of the game, which are okay, I'll put it this way. If you're seeing an erotic scene in the game, it's either something horrible, like it's an erotic scene where it's like some kind of trauma. It's not even like it's an erotic scene, but it's not something you want to see, or it's something that's totally gonna kill you. So it makes the erotic scenes like totally not erotic, in a sense that like always it's either disturbing, it's a game over, or it's there. I can think of like maybe only one situation in the entire game where there's like not some kind of disturbing element to the sexual part. And that's about it, actually. And there's a bunch there. I mean, there's a bunch of sex scenes you can see, but if you're seeing them, you're almost like always participating in something that's not something you want to do, or something that is killing you. So it's it's actually done pretty well because, as I said before, this is actually the first erotic game I've ever played, but there's no sense of like you want to do anything erotic in this game. In the story, there's like no reason to do anything beyond like these horrible, disturbing situations, until like almost pretty much the end of the game. And it's really interesting in the sense that like it does take like these really adult sexual situations, and that's the kind of thing you would think like people are playing this game for the kind of fap worthiness of it or whatever, but there isn't really any. There's because if you're reading the story, you get to these situations, you're like, oh man, does this have to happen? It's always like that. You're just like, oh, don't stop. It's how I always felt for most of the time, because like you don't really have a choice. You kind of have to do these things. But I was less thinking like this is hot, and more like this is fucked up. Almost all the time, every time that happened. So I think it's probably the best way they could have done these kind of sexual scenes, for me at least. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there watching this right now who are excited for that kind of thing, but it's not my kind of thing. I'm not like turned off by the sexual element. I just think like I'm not gonna be getting off on it. And this game really handles that, because like all of those scenes like are there and they're disturbing. So I gotta say, good job on that. There are bosses in this game too. Like I said, there's kind of chaos and law things. So you have your actual chaos and law kind of bosses. And you have these kind of chaos and law things going on. So you will have law side angels and kind of chaos side demons, and they all have their own kind of things that they're trying to do in the game. And it makes things interesting because you also have the kind of third neutral route, I guess. Like they end up being the kind of gods like Amaterasu and stuff like that, the kind of country gods or whatever they are. I don't know what they're called in English, so I'm just making up a name for them. But really, I think the RPG parts end up being like the least fun parts of the game. And it's not that they're bad. I don't think they're bad, but they're not incredible. They're not difficult at all. Speaking of that, like the system for playing the game, interesting. It's interesting, and it would be a good system if it were more difficult. But it does a thing where it makes it like almost unnecessary to actually do battles. And I'll explain that. You have levels in the game. You can level up, and you'll have to level up, and you'll have to do things like, there's no demon fusing, but there kind of is. Like, you fight demons and monsters, and you get swords that are named after demons. And they're kind of demon swords, or god swords, or whatever, and they're imbued in the sword. So it's like fusing demons to get new, stronger demons, except they're not demons, they're swords. And you use them as weapons. But that's, it is a kind of fusion element with essentially demons, so it's in there and you have to do it to get more powerful, but it's not like incredibly difficult. You can do it over really quickly. Battles are super snappy, like, and I'll explain, because if you play the battles, like, they kind of take a little bit if you're just doing it manually. There's like kind of 3 ways to fight a battle. There's kind of manual, which I did for all the bosses, but like everything else you can auto battle. And the auto battle is pretty solid. You don't usually lose characters when you're auto battling. They usually do it pretty well. But there's also another option. There's instant battle, which is just like you get to the battle and you just, control click on the auto battle and it just instant battles. It's just the start is the end. You just click the button and you just goes right to the result of the battle. Um, Almost always win. I think there was like you just go through the battles and it just snap. Every battle takes 2 seconds. So when you're collecting swords to fuse, it's super quick. You gain levels really quickly, and you gain the battles take no time at all. So you get all these swords really quickly, and you can't really. Um, I guess you could level up and get super powerful swords pretty quickly, but it would be more grindy and less fun if you did that. I think there's no real reason to do that either, because none of the normal battles are tough at all. So you go through and you get these kind of secondary world dungeons. It's like a separate dimension that the dungeons are in, and the dungeons in the separate dimensions are almost all identical. They're not only that, they're all multi-leveled, and each level is the same, and it's just a straight path. So there's almost no. It's not very interesting or great at all. The dungeon crawling part is is like totally just there in order to collect swords. There's like no other reason to go there because there's nothing interesting going on. There's maybe 5 or 6 different types of the same dungeon, essentially, over and over. It's not like you do it a million times, but there are about, I don't know, 15 dungeons, and out of those 15, probably 12 of them are exactly the same except for kind of palette swaps. So, like I said, the RPG parts of this, the actual dungeon crawling, is probably the worst part. And it's not to say that the battles are not fun. If you actually play the battles, it's a good system, and it's interesting in the sense that you can't heal outside of battle. You can only all of your powers come from the swords. So if you're trying to heal yourself, you have to heal in battle with the sword. So if the battle is over, you automatically heal a bit of your health, but it's usually not your max health. So if you get damaged a lot in a battle, you're gonna have to be careful, even more careful in next battle. And if you die, it's like you're starting off the next battle pretty low HP, so there's a good chance you might die again. Not that you're really going to be dying all that much, but you might run across something that gets lucky and you just auto battle, and you just the auto battle finishes and like you've lost a character or something. That sometimes happens, but it's pretty rare. But yeah, there's a lot of other stuff I wanted to talk about with this game. Let's see. Like I said, the sword mechanic is cool, but it's not even really. There are a lot of different kind of attacks and things you can do with the swords, and I didn't collect all the swords. I didn't try to find every single one of them. There's 100 altogether, and I probably got about 60, just from normal play. So I didn't really get all the swords or anything, but I got most of the more powerful ones because you have to get them towards the end of the game. It's part of the story. But yeah, I want to talk about. I guess I could talk about the music for a bit. It's not super great. It's not horrible or anything. There's none of it that's annoying, but you do hear the same kind of things over and over again, and especially because Japanese isn't my first language, and I can read faster than they talk in the game, but I'm still much slower than a normal Japanese reader. So my time listening to the music that's playing when they're doing the visual novel is probably much longer than a normal person's would be. So it's the kind of thing where that is those songs are not super great or anything. So, but they're not annoying. So that's kind of a I don't know, not so good, not so bad kind of situation where I'm not gonna be excited to listen to them again, but I wasn't stabbing myself in the ears to not hear the sounds anymore. You could turn them off anyway. You could turn out the background music if you really wanted to, but yeah. So I don't know. I feel like I'm missing something. I wanted to talk about a bunch more stuff in this game because I really did enjoy playing it. Even though the RPG parts weren't that good, as a visual novel, if there were no RPG parts and this were just a visual novel, I probably would have been even happier with it. Only because the RPG parts, beyond being not incredibly exciting. The controls were weird. Um, I don't know how to explain the controls because they're analog controls built with a digital control pad. I don't. It's like, okay. For example, when you move the character, you should be moving with, I guess, WASD or the arrow keys. And those are, that's a digital option. You have yes or no, full blast or nothing with the arrow keys. And the movement system is based on an analog system. So what happens is you have a kind of like an iPhone game kind of virtual control pad that you can use with the mouse. And it seems like not, for example, if you're in a dungeon and you want to turn around and you're using the arrow keys, you got to run in a complete circle. It's like a PS1 kind of game. The control is like that too. So it's like a PS1 game. Or a PSP game with kind of poor controls when you're playing that way. But and like I can understand like you're playing like that and the game tells you to control it with the arrow keys. So, I was playing for first playing the RPG parts for a little while, and I was thinking this control is really bad. Like it's jerky, and I'm always running into stuff because it's like, the dungeons aren't that big, and I'm going at max speed, and it felt like a little awkward. And I thought like, wow, this is not that good. And then I realized like, oh, if I use the virtual control pad, I can turn around on the dime. Like I can just spin right around, or if it's a smaller area, I can kind of control the speed with the analog pad. And then like the controls were like less, stupid, but it was still like less, if I had a controller with an analog stick, it probably would have been good. But I tried to plug in a controller and the game doesn't support that. So it was the kind of thing where, it was partially the mouse and partially arrow keys for me. So like when I knew I wasn't going to be running into stuff, I just use the arrow keys. And then when I get into situations where I have to turn around or something, I would be like switching over to the mouse. And that was kind of, it's a little awkward. You kind of want to choose one or the other, and you didn't really have the option unless you wanted to run in big circles every time you wanted to turn around, or you wanted to kind of bump into stuff all the time. So that was a downside. But the visual novel in this game is like really, really interesting, and it's such like a slow burn, that it builds up and then kind of explodes halfway through, and then you're like in this confusing situation. And I don't want to ruin the story, but it's kind of a situation where you figure out all of this stuff, and the game, it's like a pressure cooker. Imagine this, like you have a pressure cooker and it building up, and like halfway through the game someone lets out the pressure and it just kind of blows off like a big rush, and then quickly closes it back and lets it build again. That's kind of how the game works in the terms of the story. So by the time you get to the end, it's like you're back to kind of this pressure cooker explosion in the story. And it does a really good job of that because, like I'm saying, when the first time it's kind of like the false ending. You're playing and you get there and you're like, wow, this is the end? Is this the end? Because it's like soul-crushingly depressing. And you get there and you're like, oh, did I do something really wrong in this game? Because this couldn't be possibly a good ending. This is a terrible ending. And I get there and I'm like, wow, this is depressing. And then it didn't end. So I was like, oh, okay. Confused. Don't know what's happening right now, but at least that wasn't the end because, my God. And then it just builds back up from there, and it's pretty interesting, actually. I really enjoyed so much about this game. And I'm really glad that I got the special edition now because the world book here with the character designs, it's pretty interesting because it tells a lot about the kind of backstory for each character in each like type of worlds. And It's pretty helpful actually if you play the pen and paper RPG, because it kind of expands on a bunch of stuff in there and covers a bunch of the same stuff too. It's not like entirely new material, but it does cover a lot of interesting things. And then it talks about all the swords and gives you kind of background history on all the swords and what they're about. And it's pretty great actually. The book that came with the special edition, definitely worth it. Yeah, this video is really long, way longer than I thought it was going to be, considering this is a visual novel, and I'm not like even a huge visual novel fan, but this is probably the best visual novel I've ever played. It's definitely the most gripping one that I've ever played. At least it's the one that I enjoyed the story of the most. And I haven't played a ton of visual novels, but the story in this one just blows away pretty much everything else I've ever played. So yeah, I'm gonna end this here. This video is over a half hour. I didn't expect it to be, but there it is. Yeah, so if you're interested in this, you need to be able to read Japanese. If you don't, it's going to be a pretty boring game. Not going to be a fun game either. You're going to play through it and you're just going to be skipping text for like the majority of the time, and then you're going to get into these kind of not so fun RPG sections. The game would be terrible if you couldn't read Japanese. But if you could read Japanese, get this. So good. The story is so good. Yeah, that's about it. I have no real complaints beyond the RPG sections being somewhat lackluster. But yeah, if you play pen and paper RPGs, get this too. It's good. Again, no English for that, but I actually have translated character creation. If anyone's interested, I guess I'd have to type all that stuff out. I've just been writing it. But if anyone really wanted to play it, I have the character creation stuff translated. You have to make up everything else yourself, though. So yeah, that's about it. I'm gonna end this. This video is already too long. So catch you guys next time when I'm talking about something else. See you then. See you next time.